With the most recent episode of House of the Dragon, war has begun in earnest. Someday, many years from now, in Westeros, this conflict will come to be known as the Dance of the Dragons, and we have just seen why. We just viewed the battle at Rook's Rest, which is one of my favorite battles from the book, and it involved three dragons all tearing each other apart, with disastrous results for two of those dragons. Today, I'm going to analyze this conflict as well as the history of dragon fights in Westeros, as it's happened twice before in the time since Aegon the Conqueror initially took this continent with his two sisters/wives. It's a pretty interesting history to look at, and it could be very interesting to examine for the war to come, where this might go, and how these weapons of mass destruction that are alive and have wills of their own can be very influential on the events to come. I won't spoil anything for the future of House of the Dragon in this video, and if you enjoy, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more House of the Dragon and A Song of Ice and Fire analysis. This battle took place at Rook's Rest, which is a fairly small location in the Crown Lands. It's not very important outside of this one specific event, but this specific event is a pretty strong reason to know this very niche location on Westeros. It's worth noting that this location might have some importance going forward, as Sunfire, being so injured, is kind of stuck there. Sunfire's not dead. I'm not sure if you were able to catch that in the episode itself, but Sunfire is not going to be able to fly for some time, so Rook's Rest might have a dragon for a little bit. With that said, this specific conflict between dragons is quite different from the previous iterations of such fights that we've seen so far in Westerosi history. We saw one of those in the last season House of the Dragon, which we'll get to, but one of them actually comes from long before House of the Dragon. I doubt we'll ever see it on screen unless we get an adaptation of one of George R.R. Martin's kind of novella short stories called Sons of the Dragon, which I would love, but I don't think that's particularly likely, with the focus currently on House of the Dragon, Dunk and Egg, and eventually Aegon's conquest, supposedly. The first event in Westeros where dragon fought dragon was known as the Battle Beneath the God's Eye. Don't look up the battle above the God's Eye unless you want spoilers for House of the Dragon, but the Battle Beneath the God's Eye was a fight between one king of Westeros and one claimant to the throne of Westeros. Maegor the Cruel had seized the throne after the death of his brother Aenys. Aenys was a very weak monarch, Maegor was very strong and valued military strength, and he claimed the dragon of his father to kind of prove his might and prove that he was the rightful king. That being Balerion, the Black Dread, the largest dragon ever seen in Westeros. However, there was another claimant for the crown at this point. Aegon the Uncrowned, he came to be called. Different Aegon than the one they're currently dealing with, or the Conqueror. This Aegon was the son of Aenys I, and he was essentially imprisoned by peasants prior to Maegor seizing the throne, so he wasn't able to go and actually take it for himself. However, he was eventually able to find his freedom, gather an army, and begin marching on the Iron Throne. However, this was not a great strategic move. Aegon had one army, whereas Maegor had several. He possessed the resources of the crown and was able to put them to good use. Multiple of Maegor's armies harassed Aegon's as it was moving eastward towards King's Landing, before eventually coming to a head around Harrenhal, just south of the lake known as the God's Eye, which is a fairly important location in Westeros. There, Balerion and Maegor appeared over the ridge, coming down on them not dissimilarly to, I would imagine, Drogon and Daenerys in the Spoils of War, though hopefully better written. Aegon was there, and he had a dragon, which is why I'm talking about this. His dragon's name was Quicksilver. Quicksilver was not young, so to speak, but compared to Balerion, pretty much any other dragon is tiny. The two of them fought briefly, but it was all for naught ultimately. Aegon was knocked out of the sky, and Quicksilver was devoured by Maegor's dragon, Balerion. This was the first time on Westeros where dragons fought dragons, as previously all three of the Conqueror's dragons had been on the same side. That sort of set the tone for conflicts to come, at least between Targaryens. The other instance of dragon fighting dragon we saw in House of the Dragon Season 1. It's also in Fire and Blood, but this is the Battle Above Storm's End, where we saw Vhagar eat Arrax and Luke. That said, I was very surprised that they found Luke's clothes in a net at the beginning of the season, given that it seemed like he got pretty cleanly eaten, but who knows. Furthermore, this is kind of falling into the same camp as the last one, being a massive, massive dragon, the largest dragon by a mile on Westeros at that time, eating a very tiny dragon in pretty much a single bite. I think Quicksilver put up a little more of a fight than Arax did, though in the show, Arax did a little bit more than he did in the book. There's a blast of fire, he runs away pretty effectively, but ends up slowing down at a point and getting chomped. It's pretty unfortunate, and it is one of the events that is very much credited with starting the war, but I do think that Rook's Rest, as being the first real battle outside of Burning Mill, at least the first dragon battle, does mark a bit of a shift in the war itself. As we saw, Rook's Rest was very different from the end of Season 1. Rather than pretty much one bite and done, there was a pretty active scrap between all three dragons, and two of them got either very injured or killed. Meleys got straight up killed. Sunfire, the most beautiful dragon to ever live, was pretty horribly injured, which isn't great. I do wish we'd seen Sunfire more than for like 3 seconds in episode 7, and then in this episode where he's horribly injured, but I digress. It is very different as compared to just a small dragon getting eaten by a big one, and I do think it very much kind of better sets the stage for the future of the dance, as there is a pretty wide variety of dragon sizes and types throughout this conflict. Meleys, the Red Queen, is a pretty famous dragon on Westeros. She's fairly old. She initially belonged to the mother of Daemon and Viserys. Alyssa was her name, Alyssa Targaryen, and she was known to be the fastest dragon on Westeros in her time. However, that was long ago. It was about 80, 70-ish years ago when Meleys was described as the fastest dragon in Westeros, and unfortunately in the time since, while she has gotten bigger, she's also described as having gotten a fair bit lazier. They're still fierce when roused. That makes sense that if she were the fastest, maybe she would have put more effort into going away. But that said, I think that Rhaenys probably could have gotten away regardless. I think it was more just being resigned to doing as much damage as she possibly could. Sunfire is a fairly young dragon. He seems a bit bigger than Syrax, which is notable because Syrax, Rhaenyra's dragon, is pretty small, especially given the fact that Rhaenyra is about a decade or more, I think 15 years, Aegon Sr. in the show. So overall, it really doesn't make sense that Sunfire would be so much bigger, unless maybe Syrax has been contained more. One of my favorite elements of this battle is how much it demonstrates everyone's fear of Vhagar being completely in the right. Vhagar is a monster, and pretty much nothing on Westeros can really stand up to her. If it was just one-on-one, I think Meleys would pretty cleanly have beaten Sunfire, but given the fact that Vhagar was there, it just would not have been a contest. I don't know if Meleys could have beaten Vhagar in a one-on-one situation. That's more of a death battle situation than I'm willing to get into here. I think that Meleys maybe... There are circumstances where I'm sure Meleys could have beaten Vhagar, but I think just the sheer size of this creature is so immense and so just unable to be overcome. I love that and how they've shown it in the show, as in Game of Thrones, all three of Daenerys' dragons look pretty much identical, but here we can see a very distinct identity for each and every one of the dragons, especially Vhagar, who is just this force of nature anytime she's on screen. While this battle may seem to be a pretty massive loss for Rhaenyra's side, it's not without its cost for the Greens. As previously mentioned, Sunfire is horrendously injured, and Aegon got hit pretty hard in the battle, especially by fire, so we'll have to see how he recovers. Overall, the King being out of commission could be a pretty both pros and cons situation for the Greens, insofar as it's probably bad for morale for the King to be on fire, but also if the King is as bad at decision making and just ruling as Aegon is, probably for the best. That said, Aemond is likely next in line to take over as regent, given the fact that Jaehaerys is dead and would have been 6 if he wasn't dead. That very much could spell some not great things for the Greens as well, given the fact that Aemond is very much a war hawk in this situation. It'll be interesting to see how everyone reacts to this, especially Corlys Velaryon. He's one of my favorite characters, and his and Rhaenys' relationship was one of my favorites in the show, and I'm sure it's going to be heartbreaking to see. I will also say there's been a lot of talk on like the dragon math of it all, the fact that the Greens only have 4 dragons, but I must say the Greens are kind of literally killing it in terms of their competition. They have had 4 dragons since the beginning, and they still have 4 dragons now. Sunfire is still alive. Hopefully will soon recover. We will see. But being able to take out 2 of Rhaenyra's dragons already, being Arax and Meleys, is pretty remarkable, given the fact that Caraxes is currently off on his own in the Riverlands, and I don't know, maybe that could be a next target. We've heard a lot of talk about Harrenhal, so maybe the Greens' eyes will turn there next. Who knows, though? I could see a number of military strategies being pitched by Aemond and by Criston. Overall thoughts on the episode, my heart is well and truly torn. I don't know if this was my favorite episode of the season so far or episode 2. It's tough to say. I think 2 very narrowly edges it out. Episode 4, I mean, just the excellent dragon stuff, but episode 2 just had so many great scenes. The Eric Arc fight, and especially Otto's conversation with Aegon and Kristen, I think is my favorite scene in the show so far. So I think episode 2 is still the best in my mind so far, but it is very close. I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. What did you think of this episode, and what do you think of the first half of the season as a whole? I'd love to hear your opinion. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. It really helps the channel grow, and it is free. I have a lot of upcoming content on House of the Dragon and A Song of Ice and Fire, so if you're interested in either or both, be sure to stick around. Make sure you don't miss anything. I'd really appreciate it. I'll probably have another video up later this week on A Song of Ice and Fire, or maybe on House of the Dragon if I have more ideas about it. We will see, and I very much appreciate you watching this far. Thank you for your time. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone. Don't get eaten by dragons or let your dragon get eaten by dragons.